Chosen one. God saw what no one else did. Your time of honor has finally come, chosen one. Stop for a moment, because what I am about to tell you is something I have been waiting to say for a long time. There was a moment recently, one you may have already forgotten, because it did not feel significant to you at the time, when you did something quietly remarkable, and I want you to know that it did not go unnoticed. You did not do it for applause. You did not do it because anyone was watching, or because you thought it would matter to your future, or because you were trying to prove anything to anyone, including me. You did it simply because something in you, underneath all the exhaustion and the hurt you were carrying, still chose the harder, better path when the easier one was right there in front of you. I want to take you back to that moment gently, because I think you deserve to understand what actually happened in it. You were tired. Not ordinary tired, but the kind of tired that comes from carrying real weight for a long stretch of time without much relief. You had every reasonable justification available to you to respond poorly, to snap, to withdraw, to let bitterness finally win after holding it off for so long. Anyone watching from the outside would have understood if you had, but you did not. In that exact moment, something deeper than your exhaustion made a different choice. You chose patience when irritation would have been easier to justify. You chose gentleness when sharpness was sitting right there, fully available, fully understandable, given what you had been through. You chose to stay soft in a moment that was practically begging you to harden. I want you to sit with that for a moment, because I do not think you have fully given yourself credit for it. Most people, under that same pressure, carrying that same weight, would have reacted very differently, and no one would have blamed them for it. You did not take the easier route simply because you did not know a better one existed. You knew exactly how satisfying the harsher response would have felt in that moment, and you chose against it anyway. That choice mattered more than you realized while you were making it. It is easy to assume that quiet, unglamorous moments of restraint do not carry much weight, that they simply disappear once the moment passes, unnoticed and unrecorded. I want to tell you plainly that this is not true. That moment was seen. Every part of it, the internal struggle, the temptation to respond in kind, the quiet decision to choose differently. All of it registered clearly, and it mattered considerably more than you have given yourself credit for. I want to explain something about the pattern I have actually been watching in you, because I do not think this was an isolated incident. There is a difference between a person who occasionally manages a moment of grace under pressure and a person whose default response, even under real strain, consistently leans toward patience rather than retaliation. You belong to the second category, and that is rarer than you probably assume. Think honestly about how often you have chosen honesty when a small lie would have been easier, and no one would have known the difference. Think about how often you have extended kindness to someone who genuinely did not deserve it and likely never fully appreciated it. Think about the countless small moments where you did the harder right thing instead of the easier wrong thing. Not because anyone was tracking it, but because something in you consistently refuses to become smaller or crueler than you actually are. Regardless of what circumstances seem to be asking of you, that consistency is the actual remarkable thing here, more than any single moment on its own. Anyone can manage a good response once. On a good day, when circumstances are relatively kind. What is far less common is a person who keeps choosing that same steadiness across many different seasons, including the genuinely hard ones, without expecting recognition, without needing proof that it matters, simply because that is who they have decided to be regardless of what is happening around them. I want to speak now about why this particular quality carries so much weight. Most people's behavior correlates fairly predictably with how they are being treated. Kindness tends to produce kindness in return. Hostility tends to produce hostility in return. This is simply how most people operate, and it is understandable, even reasonable. As a general pattern of human behavior, what is considerably less common is someone whose behavior remains steady regardless of how they are being treated. Someone whose kindness does not depend on receiving kindness first. Someone whose integrity holds even when circumstances would fully justify letting it slip. You have shown that quality, not perfectly, not without struggle, but consistently enough that it has become a genuine, recognizable pattern, rather than an occasional exception. I want you to understand that this is not a small thing. It is one of the rarer and more valuable qualities a person can carry, precisely because it requires choosing against your own immediate impulses, repeatedly, often without any external reward for doing so. I want to talk honestly about what this has actually cost you, because I do not want to romanticize it into something effortless. Choosing patience when anger would have been easier is genuinely difficult. Choosing to stay kind toward people who have hurt you is genuinely costly, especially when it happens repeatedly, without acknowledgement, without anyone else fully seeing what it required of you internally. I know this has not been easy. I know there were moments you wanted to let yourself react the way anyone else would have, and chose not to. And that choice took something real out of you each time you made it. I want to honor that cost directly rather than pretending it was simple. The strength required to consistently choose grace under real. Ongoing pressure is not the same as simply being naturally unbothered by difficulty. You have felt the difficulty fully. You have felt the pull toward bitterness, toward withdrawal, toward giving people exactly what they gave you. And you chose differently anyway, over and over, even when it was genuinely hard to do so. I want to speak now about what this quality actually produces, beyond the moment itself, because I do not think you have fully seen the wider effect of it yet. When you respond to difficulty with steadiness rather than escalation, something shifts, not only in you, but in the situation itself. Conflict that could have spiraled further often quiets instead. Bitterness that could have spread to other relationships stays contained. People who expected retaliation and did not receive it are sometimes changed by that unexpected steadiness in ways neither of you may ever fully discuss out loud. I am not telling you this to suggest that your kindness always produces a visible, satisfying result. Sometimes it does not. Sometimes people continue behaving poorly, regardless of how graciously you respond, and that can feel deeply unfair, especially when you are the one absorbing the cost of staying kind while receiving very little in return. I want to acknowledge that unfairness, honestly, rather than pretend it away. Choosing grace does not guarantee that the other person will change, or apologize, or ever fully recognize what your restraint actually cost you. But I want you to understand that the value of that choice was never entirely dependent on the other person's response. Something real happened in you each time you chose patience over retaliation, honesty over convenience, kindness over withdrawal. That internal shift matters independently of whether anyone else ever notices or acknowledges it. You are not the same person you would have become if you had consistently chosen the easier, harsher path instead. The version of you that kept choosing grace even at real cost is stronger and more solid than the version that would have existed if you had simply given in to every justified impulse toward bitterness. I want to talk now about honor, because I think that word deserves more attention than it usually gets. Honor is not the same as recognition. Recognition is external, dependent on other people noticing and acknowledging something. Honor, in the sense I mean it, is deeper than that. It is the quiet dignity that comes from having consistently done the harder right thing, whether or not anyone else ever saw it clearly. You have been building that kind of honor for a long time, quietly, without much external acknowledgement, simply through the accumulated weight of choices most people never see or fully understand. I want to tell you that this kind of honor does not require public recognition to be real. It exists in you regardless of whether anyone else ever names it directly. But I also want you to know that this particular time, this particular season, carries something different. A moment where that quiet honor finally begins to be seen more clearly. Not because you changed anything about how you have been living, but because the season itself has shifted toward greater visibility. I want to speak honestly about what it might mean for that honor to become more visible, without it turning into something performative or self-congratulatory. Visibility is not the point. The point was never to be seen. But there is something meaningful about a season where quiet faithfulness finally receives acknowledgement. Not because you need it to validate what you already know about yourself, but because acknowledgement, when it arrives honestly, can be a genuine gift rather than something you were chasing all along. I want you to consider what it might feel like to finally receive some quiet confirmation that your consistency mattered, that the choices no one else fully saw were not invisible after all, that the cost you absorbed quietly, repeatedly, was not simply wasted effort into a void. I want that confirmation to arrive for you gently, in whatever form it takes, whether through a specific relationship finally acknowledging something, through an opportunity that reflects the character you have been building all along, or simply through a growing internal sense of peace about who you have consistently chosen to be. I want to talk now about what comes next, because I do not want this message to end with only a look backward at what you have already done. I want to speak about what this consistency positions you for going forward. People who have demonstrated steadiness under real pressure tend to become people others instinctively trust during difficult moments. Not because they demand the trust, but because their track record, quietly accumulated over time, speaks for itself in ways words rarely can. I believe you are entering a season where that trust becomes more visible, where people around you begin to lean on the steadiness you have built, sometimes without fully understanding why they trust you the way they do. This is not a burden being placed on you. It is simply the natural result of what you have already been building, becoming more apparent to the people around you. I want to speak about the specific relief that comes from finally being seen accurately by at least some of the people in your life. After a long stretch of feeling like your quieter, more consistent efforts went largely unnoticed. That relief is coming, gradually, not necessarily in one dramatic moment, but through an accumulation of smaller moments where people begin to recognize more clearly than before the actual character behind your ordinary daily choices. I want to address something you may have quietly wondered: whether staying kind and steady while enduring real hardship was actually worth the cost. Whether it might have been easier, in hindsight, to simply let bitterness take over the way it would have for most people in your position. I want to answer that honestly. Yes, it was worth it. Not because bitterness would have been an unreasonable response, but because who you have become through consistently choosing otherwise is genuinely more solid, more trustworthy, and more capable of real, lasting influence than the version of you that would have existed if you had simply given in. I want to speak now about the specific exhaustion that often accompanies this kind of consistent restraint, because I do not want to suggest that choosing grace repeatedly comes without a real cost to your own energy and well-being. Staying patient under ongoing pressure is genuinely tiring. Choosing kindness toward people who have not earned it drains something real from you each time, even when it is the right choice. I want you to know that this exhaustion is legitimate, not evidence that you are somehow failing at maintaining your character, simply evidence that maintaining character under real pressure is genuinely hard work, deserving of real rest afterward. I want to talk about rest now because I think you have likely postponed it more than you should have, believing that staying strong meant never fully setting down the weight you have been carrying. Rest is not a betrayal of the steadiness you have built. It is what allows that steadiness to continue sustainably rather than eventually collapsing under its own accumulated weight. I want you to give yourself permission to actually rest now, not as a reward you have to earn through more effort, but simply as a necessary part of continuing to be who you have consistently chosen to be. I want to speak now about what specific changes might begin appearing in your life as this quieter, more honored season unfolds. You may notice relationships shifting, some deepening as people finally recognize the steadiness you have offered them all along. Others naturally fading as they no longer match the direction your consistency has been quietly building toward. You may notice opportunities appearing that specifically require the kind of character you have already developed. Situations where your particular capacity for patience and grace under pressure becomes genuinely valuable rather than simply something you privately absorbed the cost of. I want you to pay attention to these shifts as they arrive, not with anxious anticipation, but with a kind of quiet readiness. You do not need to force anything to happen faster than it is already unfolding. The consistency you have built does not require dramatic acceleration to eventually be recognized. It simply requires you to continue being who you already are, while remaining open to the ways that recognition might begin arriving in forms you did not necessarily expect. I want to talk about comparison for a moment because I suspect you have occasionally wondered why other people's good fortune seems to arrive more visibly or more quickly than your own, despite your consistent effort to maintain good character under real difficulty. I want to gently address that comparison directly. Other people's timelines are not a measure of your own worth or your own eventual outcome. What has been quietly building in you does not need to match anyone else's visible progress to eventually matter in your own life. In your own time, in a way specifically suited to what you have actually been developing all along. I want to speak honestly about doubt as well, because I suspect there have been moments you privately wondered whether staying consistent was actually noticed by anything beyond your own private awareness of it. I want to address that doubt directly. It was noticed, not in some abstract, unfalsifiable sense, meant only to comfort you, but genuinely in the accumulated weight of every choice you made when the easier option was fully available and you chose otherwise anyway. I want to talk now about what it means to finally step into a season of honor without that stepping becoming arrogant or self-congratulatory. Honor received well does not inflate a person. It tends to deepen humility rather than erode it, because a person who genuinely understands the cost of their own consistency also understands how easily they could have chosen differently. How much conscious effort was required to maintain steadiness rather than give in to easier impulses? That awareness tends to keep a person grounded even as recognition begins arriving more visibly. I want to speak about the people who may not fully understand or acknowledge what you have quietly built, because I do not want to promise you universal recognition that may not actually arrive from every direction. Some people, even now, may continue overlooking or underestimating what your consistency has actually required of you. I want you to know that this does not diminish the reality of what you have built. Recognition from every single person was never the actual measure of whether your character mattered. It mattered independently of universal acknowledgement, and it continues to matter even from the people who may never fully see it clearly. I want to talk about legacy for a moment, because I think you have likely underestimated how far the effects of your consistency actually reach beyond your own individual life. When you choose patience over retaliation, when you choose honesty over convenient shortcuts, when you choose kindness over withdrawal, that choice does not only affect you, it quietly shapes the people watching you. Sometimes people you are not even thinking about in the exact moment you make that choice. Children absorb more from watching an adult maintain character under real pressure than from almost anything that adult explicitly teaches them in calmer moments. Friends and colleagues are influenced more by what they observe someone actually do when circumstances are difficult than by any stated values offered during easier times. Your consistency ripples outward in ways you may never fully witness yourself, and that matters more than it probably feels like it does on an ordinary difficult day. I want you to carry that knowledge gently, not as pressure to perform character flawlessly at all times, but as a quiet reminder that what you have already built has value extending well beyond your own personal experience of it. I want to speak now about what practical steps might look like as you move into this season more fully. I do not want this message to remain entirely abstract, offering encouragement without any concrete direction. First, continue doing what you have already been doing. The small, unglamorous choices toward patience and honesty that likely feel unremarkable to you by now simply because you have practiced them so consistently. Do not assume that consistency has to look dramatically different now that recognition is beginning to arrive. The same quiet steadiness that built this season is exactly what will sustain it going forward. Second, allow yourself to actually receive acknowledgement when it arrives, rather than deflecting it entirely out of habitual humility. There is a difference between staying grounded and refusing to ever accept that your effort mattered. When someone finally recognizes your consistency, whether through a simple comment, a renewed trust, or an opportunity that specifically values the character you have built, let yourself actually receive that rather than immediately minimizing it. Third, continue extending grace to yourself during the moments you inevitably fall short of the consistency you are aiming for. No one maintains perfect patience or perfect honesty at all times, and expecting flawless consistency from yourself would be an unreasonable standard that ultimately undermines the very character you are trying to build. Growth includes occasional failure, and that failure does not erase the broader pattern you have already established. Fourth, remain patient with the pace at which recognition actually unfolds. I know waiting has already cost you a great deal, and I do not want to suggest that further waiting is simple or easy. But real, lasting recognition tends to arrive gradually rather than instantly, built on an accumulated foundation rather than a single dramatic moment. Trust that foundation rather than needing immediate, visible proof that everything has shifted all at once. I want to speak now about the specific fear that this recognition, once it arrives, might somehow not last, that circumstances could shift again, and everything you have quietly built might feel undone by a single hard season. I want to address that fear honestly. Character built through repeated, difficult choices over time is considerably more durable than character that arrived easily or accidentally. What you have built through genuine difficulty tends to hold steady through future difficulty as well, precisely because it was forged through real testing rather than simply assumed without ever being challenged. I want to talk about gratitude for a moment, not as an obligation, but as something genuinely useful moving forward into this new season. Gratitude tends to widen a person's capacity to notice good things as they actually arrive, rather than remaining so focused on what has not yet happened that the things which have already begun shifting go unnoticed. I want to invite you to notice, honestly, whatever small signs of this season already beginning to unfold might be present in your life right now, even if they feel modest compared to what you might be hoping for eventually. I want to speak plainly about self-compassion as well, because I suspect you have been considerably harder on yourself throughout this long stretch of consistent effort than you would ever be towards someone else, demonstrating the exact same character under the exact same pressure. If someone else had walked through everything you have walked through, maintaining the same patience, the same honesty, the same steady kindness under real strain, you would likely admire them without hesitation. I want you to consider extending that same admiration toward yourself, rather than continuing to minimize what your own consistency has actually required and accomplished. I want to close by returning to where this message began, reminding you that the quiet choice you made, the one that started this entire reflection, was not an isolated event, but part of a much larger ongoing pattern that has been building in you for a long time. That pattern has been seen, valued, and is now beginning to be honored more visibly. Not because you changed who you are to earn that honor, but because who you already are is finally becoming more apparent to the people and circumstances around you. You do not need to do anything differently to deserve what is beginning to unfold. You simply need to continue being who you have already consistently chosen to be. Patient when patience is hard, honest when honesty is inconvenient, kind when kindness costs you something real. That consistency has already built something valuable, and it continues to build something valuable, regardless of how quickly or slowly the visible recognition of it actually arrives. Before you go, I want to leave you with a few simple, practical things worth holding on to in the days ahead. Notice the small signs of change, rather than only watching for something dramatic and undeniable. A conversation that goes better than expected. A moment where someone finally seems to see you more clearly than before. A quiet sense of internal peace about choices that once felt costly and unacknowledged. These are not insignificant. They are often the earliest signs of a season shifting toward greater recognition. Give yourself permission to rest without guilt, recognizing that maintaining character under real pressure is genuinely demanding work deserving of real recovery afterward. Be patient with how gradually recognition tends to unfold, understanding that lasting honor is rarely built or received all at once. Keep speaking honestly, both to yourself privately and, where it feels safe to do so, to people who genuinely see and value your consistency. And finally, keep returning to this quiet, steady truth for as long as you need it. What you have built through repeated difficult choices was never invisible. Even during the seasons, it felt that way. It mattered then. And it continues to matter now, as this season of honor gently begins to unfold around what you have already, quietly, consistently become. Take a breath. Let your shoulders drop just slightly from wherever they have been holding tension without you fully noticing it. You have already demonstrated repeatedly exactly the kind of character this new season now honors. That track record means something real. Carry it with you gently into whatever comes next, trusting that the recognition you have quietly earned is finally beginning to catch up to the character you have already faithfully built. There is more I want to say, because a single closing thought rarely carries a person through an entire season of quiet transition into greater recognition. So stay with me a little longer, even if part of you feels ready to move on now that you have heard something reassuring. I want to talk about the specific weight of having carried consistency for a long time without much visible acknowledgement. There is a particular kind of loneliness in that one that has nothing to do with being physically alone and everything to do with feeling like your steadiest, most difficult choices went largely unnoticed by the people around you. You have likely continued behaving with integrity in moments no one else witnessed, simply because that is who you have decided to be, regardless of whether anyone was there to see it. I want you to know that going unwitnessed does not mean going unnoticed entirely. Every version of your consistency that never received acknowledgement from another person, every quiet choice too small or too private for anyone else to fully register, none of it went unnoticed. It mattered, even in the moments it felt like it was happening in complete isolation, unseen by anyone at all. I want to speak now about the small, quiet acts of integrity you have shown that likely went completely unrecognized by anyone else. The private honesty when a small lie would have been easier and undetectable. The moments you extended patience to someone who genuinely tested the limits of it, without anyone else observing how much restraint that actually required. The times you chose to stay kind specifically because you did not want to become the kind of person who lets difficulty justify unkindness, even when no one would have blamed you for it. None of that was small. It takes real strength to maintain character consistently while carrying real difficulty, and that strength deserves acknowledgement, even if you have rarely given it to yourself. I want to talk honestly about the specific frustration that can accompany consistent good character without matching visible reward, because I think you have likely felt it more than you have said aloud. There is something genuinely difficult about watching people who behave with less integrity seem to receive easier outcomes, faster recognition, less resistance along their path. That frustration is not petty or ungrateful. It is simply an honest reaction to something that does, on the surface, appear unfair. I am not asking you to suppress that frustration or pretend it does not exist. I am asking you to let it exist honestly, without letting it convince you that your own consistency was therefore pointless or unnoticed. I want to speak about patience for a moment, not as passive waiting, but as an active, ongoing choice to keep maintaining character even while visible recognition continues to feel slow in arriving. Real patience involves continued effort, alongside continued waiting, and it deserves genuine respect rather than being dismissed as simply enduring without complaint. The patience you have already shown across this long stretch is not separate from the character being honored. Now, it is part of the very foundation that honor rests upon. I want to speak honestly about setbacks as well, because I do not want to suggest that once recognition begins arriving, everything moves forward smoothly without any further difficulty. There will likely still be moments ahead when your consistency is tested again, when maintaining patience or honesty or kindness feels just as costly as it ever did. That does not mean the recognition unfolding now is not real. It simply means character, once built, continues to require maintenance, the same quiet effort that built it in the first place. I want to talk about identity for a moment because I think a great deal of what has sustained your consistency connects back to a clear, steady sense of who you actually are, separate from how circumstances have treated you. Circumstances shift constantly, sometimes rewarding good character quickly, sometimes seeming to ignore it for a long stretch of time. But the core of who you actually are has remained steady beneath all of that shifting, and that steadiness is precisely what is now being honored more visibly. I want to speak about community as well, because I think consistent good character can sometimes feel isolating, especially when the people around you do not share the same commitment to patience and honesty under pressure. Even a small amount of genuine connection with someone who recognizes and values the same qualities you have been building can meaningfully lighten the sense of isolation that consistent integrity sometimes produces. If you have felt alone in maintaining this kind of character, consider that connection with people who share similar values may be part of what this new season brings toward you. I want to close this extended reflection by speaking directly to whatever specific doubt is loudest in you right now. In this exact moment, as you continue reading, whatever that particular doubt is, whether it concerns whether your consistency actually mattered, whether recognition will actually arrive, or whether you have truly been seen accurately by anyone at all, that doubt does not have final authority over what is actually true about your life. Doubt is persistent, and it often feels convincing, but it is not always accurate, and it does not change what has genuinely been building in you across this long, quiet season of consistent character. So take one more slow breath before you close this message and move forward into whatever comes next in your day. You have maintained something valuable for a long time, often without acknowledgement, often at real personal cost. Something is genuinely allowed to shift now, even quietly, even gradually, even before you can fully see every piece of what has already begun changing around you. And you are allowed to let yourself believe that, one honest day at a time, there is one final thread I want to leave with you, because I think it ties everything else together in a way that might make the whole message easier to carry once you step away from it. Everything shared here rests on one simple truth: that your consistency was never dependent on being witnessed in order to be real. You are not required to have been seen perfectly by every person around you in order for your character to have genuine value. That value existed the entire time, quietly, underneath whatever recognition did or did not arrive, present even during the seasons it felt most invisible. I want to leave you with a simple, honest picture to hold on to in the days ahead. Picture yourself a year from now, looking back at this exact season, remembering the specific stretch of consistency you have already walked through. Imagine that future version of yourself being able to say honestly that the character you built during this quiet, often unacknowledged season became the very foundation for whatever came next. Not because recognition arrived instantly, but because the consistency itself was never actually dependent on that recognition to matter. That future is not separate from what you have already built. It is simply the natural unfolding of a pattern that has already been established through countless small, difficult choices you made when easier options were fully available. Remember, one final time, that you have already demonstrated exactly the kind of character being honored now, repeatedly, across many different seasons, without a single guarantee that it would ever be visibly acknowledged. That fact alone deserves more credit than you likely give it in your quieter, more discouraged moments. Carry that evidence with you gently as you move forward from this moment, not as pressure to perform character flawlessly, but as a quiet, steady reminder available to you whenever doubt returns. You have already built something real. Whatever comes next simply continues to reveal what was already true about you long before anyone else fully recognized it. Let this be the moment you choose to continue being exactly who you have already consistently chosen to be. Gently, honestly, one small choice at a time, trusting that the recognition already unfolding will continue to become clearer as you keep walking forward. That has always been enough to build something real, even during your hardest, most unacknowledged seasons, and it remains enough today as well. Wherever you are reading this, whatever room, whatever moment of your day this happens to be, let it settle into you fully before you move on to whatever comes next. You are not required to feel completely different immediately. You are simply invited to remain a little more aware of what you have already built, trusting that the honor already beginning to unfold will continue to reveal itself patiently, one honest day at a time. Starting from right now, I want to speak a little more about what this quiet honor might actually look like once it becomes more visible, because I think it is easy to imagine recognition as something loud and dramatic, when, in reality, it often arrives in far smaller, steadier forms. It might look like a person you have known for years suddenly saying something that shows they finally understand the depth of what you have carried quietly all along. It might look like an opportunity appearing that specifically values patience and steadiness, qualities you have been building for a long time without expecting anyone to notice. It might look like nothing more dramatic than a growing sense of internal peace, a quiet knowing that you have become someone genuinely worth trusting, regardless of whether every single person around you has fully recognized it yet. I want you to hold space for all of these possibilities rather than narrowing your expectation down to only one specific form recognition must take in order to count. Sometimes the most meaningful honor is the quiet kind. The kind that settles into your own sense of self rather than arriving as a public announcement. That quiet kind of honor tends to last considerably longer than anything more dramatic, precisely because it does not depend on continued external validation to remain true. I want to talk now about what it means to keep building character even after this season of recognition begins, because I do not want you to mistake this moment as a finish line rather than a continuing process. Character is not something achieved once and then permanently secured. It continues to require the same quiet, consistent choices that built it in the first place. Patience chosen again tomorrow, honesty chosen again in the next difficult moment, kindness extended again even when it is not immediately reciprocated. The honor arriving now does not exempt you from continuing that same quiet work going forward. If anything, it simply confirms that the work has genuinely been worth doing all along, and that confirmation can become fuel for continuing rather than a reason to relax entirely. I want to speak plainly about the fear that once this recognition arrives, you might somehow lose it through a single mistake or a single moment of falling short of your usual consistency. I want to address that fear directly. Genuine character, built through repeated difficult choices over a long period of time, is not erased by a single moment of failure. You are allowed to have imperfect days even within this season of honor. What matters is the overall pattern you have established, not flawless execution of it in every single instance going forward. One difficult day does not undo years of consistent choices. Any more than one good day would have built that consistency on its own without everything that came before it. I want to talk about humility for a moment, because I think it deserves careful attention as you step into greater recognition. Genuine humility is not the same as refusing to acknowledge your own value. It is possible to recognize honestly that your consistency has mattered while still remaining grounded, still remaining aware of how much effort it required, still remaining grateful rather than entitled about whatever recognition arrives. I want you to hold both of these truths together, that what you have built genuinely deserves acknowledgement, and that receiving that acknowledgement well requires continued groundedness rather than any shift toward assuming you are now owed something simply because you have been consistent. I want to speak about the relationships in your life that may shift as this season unfolds more visibly. Some people who previously overlooked or underestimated your quiet consistency may begin treating you differently, not because you have changed who you are, but because they are finally seeing more clearly what was already true. I want you to receive that shift graciously rather than resentfully, even if part of you wishes that recognition had arrived sooner from those particular people. Growth in other people's perception often happens on its own timeline, separate from your own, and holding on to resentment about the delay tends to cost you more than it costs them. At the same time, I want you to notice honestly if there are relationships that continue refusing to acknowledge your consistency even as this season unfolds more broadly. Not everyone will necessarily catch up to seeing you clearly, and that is genuinely their limitation, rather than evidence that your character was somehow insufficient. You are allowed to continue treating those relationships with the same steady kindness you have always offered, without needing their specific recognition in order to feel confident about what you have actually built. I want to talk about the specific relief of finally being able to rest a little more fully now that some of the pressure to prove your character through constant vigilance may begin easing slightly. I do not mean that you should stop being who you are. I mean that the exhausting sense of needing to prove your consistency over and over to people who may have doubted it can begin to soften as more evidence accumulates that you are in fact who you have consistently shown yourself to be. That softening is not permission to become careless. It is simply permission to stop carrying quite so much defensive tension around your own character, trusting instead that the pattern already speaks clearly enough on its own. I want to close this reflection with one final, honest thought. Everything shared here rests on a truth that was true long before this message reached you and will remain true long after you finish reading it. You are someone who has consistently chosen the harder, better path when easier options were available. That choice, repeated across many seasons, has built something genuinely valuable, something that was never actually dependent on being seen by anyone in order to be real. The honor now beginning to unfold around you is simply the world catching up to a truth that has been quietly, faithfully established in you for a long time already. Carry that truth gently into whatever comes next. You do not need to chase recognition or force it to arrive faster than it naturally will. You simply need to continue being who you have already consistently, faithfully chosen to be, trusting that the honor already unfolding will continue to reveal itself clearly in its own time, exactly as it has already begun to do.